Now, from CBS 4 News, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Good morning, I'm Jim DeFede, and welcome to Facing South Florida. We are a little more than 3 months away from the start of the Florida legislative session, but in reality, bills are already being written and hearings are already underway. What kind of a session are we expecting? Will there be a push to effectively ban abortions in the state, as we saw recently in Alabama? And what about other issues like gun reform, climate change, and the fate of Broward Sheriff Scott Israel? And will the legislature agree with the governor that the salaries for teachers should be raised? Joining me this morning to discuss these and other issues are two state senators and longtime friends of the show. Anitere Flores is a Republican who spent 8 years in the House before joining the Senate. Her district includes Monroe County and parts of southern and western Miami-Dade County. This will be her last legislative session. And Javier Rodriguez is a Democrat whose district includes Coral Gables, Pinecrest, and Key Biscayne. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for coming in again.
Thanks for having us.
All right. So as I said, bills are being filed. Committee hearings are already taking place. Let's start with just big picture stuff. Jose, what are you expecting from this year's session?
Well, listen, we've got a lot of priorities: education, infrastructure. Those are all priorities. To be honest with you, one of my top priorities, and it has been for a while, is to try to get real action on climate change. I'm wearing rain boots. I wear the rain boots during legislative session. This will be the third one I do it. We have the ingredients of real action on climate this session. I'm pushing a number of
We'll talk about the specifics in a second, but Anitere, your last session, are you a little sentimental? Are you when you get up there in January for hearing that gavel come in for the last time, will you tear up, or will you be glad to be done with it?
Well, I don't know if I'll tear up, and I think that I've been really blessed. I have had a long career. I think a good and successful career. Made my mark on issues that are really important to me, both locally and across the state of Florida. But this still, even though it's the last session, there's still a lot of issues that I want to be working on and ensuring that our institutions, I would say if there was a theme for me for this session, it would be that ensuring that our local institutions are protected. So, ensuring that there is continued strong support for local institutions, from FIU to our school system to Jackson Health System, really making sure that that this, those that are coming after us, that we continue to give as much support, if not even stronger support, that they've had in the past.
All right, so let's start with I think one of the big issues that you're going to deal with almost at the outset, which is Governor Ron DeSantis recently announced that he wants to raise teacher salaries, the starting pay for all teachers across the state of Florida, to $47,500. It would essentially take the state of Florida from about 26th in the nation, he says, to about 2nd in the nation in terms of starting pay. And here's his rationale for it. Let's play that sound now.
But we are looking to see what can we really do in this next legislative session that would really make a positive impact on student performance and achievement. And if you look at all the different facets that are involved in education, and obviously if you're in a place like Broward or Miami-Dade, just south of us, that are very big counties, there's always a lot of moving parts. But I think the one thing that can really make the difference is having a great teacher in front of the students.
All right, and he believes that to recruit good teachers in the state of Florida, you need a better starting salary. I think we all agree teachers need to be better paid. My first question to you, Senator, is how do we pay for this?
Well, listen, the governor has laid this out, and I think it's incredible and wonderful that the governor in just his second term is really taking on an issue as this, as important as this is, and making it a priority. He laid it out, I think, very simply in saying, look, when there are priorities, we find the money for it. And the fact is that we do. Does it mean that there will, will there be a shifting in funding priorities? Perhaps. But he's made this something that's very, very important to him. It comes with a very large price tag. I think I read
$600 million?
About $600 million, which is a pretty big amount, but we did spend that number very close to it last year on some environmental priorities. Again, very important priorities, and I'm glad we made that investment. But if we found money for those priorities, I do believe that we'll find money for our teacher salaries. There's still some questions, and the devils are in the details, but I think it's wonderful that the governor is talking about increasing teacher salaries.
Senator, when I hear politicians talk about shifting priorities, I think winners and losers. Somebody wins, somebody loses. If $600 million has to be shifted to pay starting teacher salaries, Who's likely to lose in that scenario?
Well, listen, I think you're pointing at some of the questions that many of us have. All of us want our teachers to be better paid. The Republican legislature has starved education for a very long time. There's been ideological issues kind of undermining the quality of public education. Our teachers do a really great job. So I think there are questions. How real is this proposal? Is the governor going to really go and fight for it? And then your question as well is how is it going to be paid for? This is something that requires a long-term commitment. It's not just a one-time funding thing in one budget, right before an election year. That's not going to cut it. There's a lot of fairness questions in terms of what.
Well, I want to get to that in a
second,
second because essentially the governor released this as almost like a one-page statement. There weren't a lot of details in terms of where he was saying he was going to shift money to, what programs he was going to cut and move money over to. But the fairness question is one that has come up already because, while you might move a teacher who currently is making maybe $40,000 or $41,000 up to $47,500, you suddenly put them on par with a teacher who may be in the district for 11 years.
Right.
So is it fair for the teacher who's been in the district for 11 years to suddenly be making the same amount of money as someone who walks in on day one and makes the same as them?
Well, so the first thing that I want to say is that the governor has made it very clear that this would be a long-term commitment. Unlike previous individuals who have said that there should be bonuses, he's shied away from the term bonus, so I think that's very good, and he's talked about actually increasing teacher salaries. But you do make a very good point, and it's a question that I've asked, and so we are waiting for those details, not just the question about making sure that new teachers and long-term teachers have increases, but also ensuring and recognizing that there's a difference between what $47,000 means in Miami-Dade County versus what it might mean in some of the smaller counties. Our starting teacher salary right now in Miami-Dade County is $41,000. A $6,000 increase is huge and would be wonderful for our teachers. But in other counties, they'd be looking at a $12,000, $11,000 increase. So we want to make sure, I'd want to make sure, especially for our constituents here in Miami-Dade County, that there's something that can we come up with that is fair so that what we don't have is winners and losers in different parts of the state.
So this brings us to a little bit of the wonky segment of the show, something called the district cost differential. There used to be a formula that took into account districts that are basically a higher cost of living, like Miami-Dade County, like Broward County, to recognize that folks who work in those districts should get a little extra money to offset the higher expenses of living in those counties. That district cost differential was done away with under when Marco Rubio was the Speaker of the House. He got rid of it then, and there has been a fight ever since to bring that back. Speaker Oliva, the Speaker of the Florida House from the Hialeah area, Miami Lakes, says he wants to bring it back. Jose, are we likely to see it come back?
Listen, every single member of the Miami-Dade delegation, or South Florida delegation, is united on the fact that reforming our school funding formulas to make them more fair, transparent, and reliable is our #1 priority that we share across geography and party. And this is a fight that we've been engaged in a long time. I know Senator Flores, when she was chair of the Dade delegation, this was something that we actually put on paper, that this is a priority that we share. We have to get this done, a change in statute this year. This is our last chance. We have a speaker from Miami-Dade County. We've all been pretty clear that this is our thing. And I'll just tell you, and we can say it on air, the members of the Dade delegation, we went to the school board, and we met with school board members. I and others backed me up in the sentiment, please don't give us an award after the 2020 session if this does not get codified in statute. This needs to be something that we get done this year, and it has to be our #1 priority as a South Florida delegation.
All right, I want to turn to health care. Health care is another major issue. I know that this is something that you've worked on. You mentioned before making sure that institutions like Jackson are well protected, in terms of reimbursement funding. That's part of it. You've been pushing telehealth. So talk to me about where you think, what are we likely to see come out of this year's session on health care?
So, first, to set the stage, last year was a very transformative year when it came to the issue of health care. It was one of the top issues of Speaker Oliva was to make sure that we kind of brought the health care system system into the current century. And we did make some changes. We changed some issues when it was related to certificate of need, brought some more competition to the market, but we're still falling short on certain innovative ideas. So, for example, telehealth. That idea that you could, call your doctor, video, FaceTime with a nurse, and kind of get access to healthcare there. We have not done enough in that scope, I would say, and so I think that there's a lot more that we can do, especially as it would relate to bringing that technology to our schools. For so many of our kids, the schools are kind of that first line of defense for so many different things, but finding a way that we could have our school-based clinics, and we have some in Miami-Dade County, that would bring that telehealth and bring that technology directly to the schools, just so that people have access. I think we still have a far way to go, but I do believe that healthcare will be one of the top priorities for this session, and I know that it's something that's a priority for the House as well, and Speaker Oliva.
What are you expecting?
Absolutely, it has to be. I think that the main issue is bringing down the price and increasing the access. Of course, we would like the last piece of Obamacare, which is the Medicaid expansion. We're going to continue trying to keep that issue
That's
alive.
not going to happen, though.
Unfortunately, I think that the chances are low. Again, it's $5 billion a year that we miss out. I have to mention it. It's something that we're trying to keep the conversation alive. But there's a number of proposals that are floating around that aren't necessarily partisan that we're all looking at. I'm looking at some things that, for example, Mississippi has done to try to figure out how they do more transparency in drug pricing, things like that, because that is really the thing that unites us in trying to figure out how do we bring costs down.
Right.
Well, you mentioned Mississippi, so that's a nice segue for me to be able to talk about Mississippi recently passed, I think it was Mississippi, or was it Alabama? I apologize.
Alabama.
I get them confused sometimes.
Yikes.
Yeah, exactly, yikes. Alabama passed a fetal heartbeat bill, which essentially bans abortions once a heartbeat is detected, which can be as early as 6 weeks. There have been similar bills now entered into this year's legislative session. Are we going to see in an election year a strong push on doing something to sort of restrict the woman's right to choose when it comes to an abortion? Does the fetal heartbeat bill stand a chance of passing, or will something else likely substitute in its place?
Well, I think that there will be some legislation as it relates to the pro-life movement. Myself, I'm pro-life. I'm strongly pro-life, and I've passed several bills that have been on that issue. I know it's not something that my colleague over here agrees with, but I believe we have to keep in mind of what an abortion is and how it can be a very invasive and sometimes very dangerous surgery for a woman. And so I do believe that this will be a year that we will have further legislation, maybe not as early as 6 weeks, maybe not as early as a heartbeat, but right now in Florida, we have abortions legal up to the age of 20 weeks. You could get an override of that with some physician signatures. So I think that there will be some legislation. And I think that on this issue in particular, I would say that this state does lean a little bit more to the right on the issue of pro-life issues, and so I think that we'll see something this year, and it'll be up to the governor to decide whether or not to sign it. It'll be something that'll be controversial, but I do believe that it will have the votes to pass in the session.
Yeah. So the senator's right. We don't agree on this topic. I do believe that it is the woman's right to choose, and when we talk about Roe v. Wade, the legislature has been chipping away at it. But I think for the larger picture, I think that the Republican leadership wants to go straight at Roe v. Wade. I think people are aware that we have a different U.S. Supreme Court. They may not be aware we have a very different state Supreme Court with 3 new justices, and it's been pretty clear that Republicans want to tee up issues of choice. And it's not just Roe v. Wade. We have constitutional protections in our state that protect privacy that have also been the basis of protecting women's health reproductive rights. And I absolutely do think, unfortunately this year, that those of us from my position are going to be on defense with these bills coming through.
So I think this is going to be a major issue. Let's take a break here. I want to come back. I want to talk about Scott Israel. I want to talk about guns and school safety. And I want to talk about climate change. That's coming up next. Stick with us. We'll be right back.